I used to think silence was the safest place to hide. But silence has a way of making you invisible even to yourself. And when you're invisible long enough, people start to believe you don't matter at all. That's what happened to me. For years, I let them talk. I let them laugh. I let them treat my dreams like they were nothing more than a child's fantasy scribbled in crayon. And the worst part, I started to believe them. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to lift you up, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that ache. That quiet, constant hum of doubt that sits in your chest and whispers, maybe they're right. But let me tell you something, I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always the woman who swallowed her words and smiled through the sting. There was a time when I believed in myself so fiercely that nothing could shake me. I was 32 when I met Daniel. He was kind, charming, and he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. We got married within a year, and I thought I'd finally found my place in the world. I thought I'd found my people. I was wrong. Daniel's family, his father, Richard, his mother, Diane, and his older brother, Scott, they tolerated me at first. I was the new addition, the outsider who'd somehow convinced their golden boy to settle down. But tolerance isn't the same as acceptance. And over time, tolerance turned into something sharper, something colder. It started small, little comments here and there. Diane would ask me about my little projects with a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Richard would chuckle and say things like, "Well, we can't all be business people, can we?" And Scott was the worst. He'd lean back in his chair at family dinners, smirking, and say, "So, still playing around with that artsy stuff? When are you going to get a real job?" They called it graphic design. My little hobby, my artsy stuff. As if the hours I poured into building websites, designing logos, creating brand identities for small businesses, as if none of that mattered. As if I didn't matter. Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Just ignore them." And I did. For years, I ignored them. I smiled through the jabs. I laughed along when they made me the punchline. I told myself it didn't hurt. But it did. Every single time. And here's the thing. When you're constantly told you're not enough, you start to shrink. You start to doubt every decision you make, every risk you take, every dream you chase. I started questioning whether I was wasting my time, whether I should just give it all up and get a real job, like they kept suggesting. Maybe work as a receptionist somewhere. Maybe stop trying so hard to prove myself. But then something inside me shifted. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but it was somewhere between the 40th dismissive comment and the 100th forced smile. I realized I was tired of being small, tired of letting them define my worth, tired of waiting for permission to be proud of myself. So I stopped waiting. I started working harder. Not to prove them wrong, not yet, anyway, but to prove something to myself. I took on bigger clients. I stayed up late perfecting designs. I learned new skills, studied marketing strategies, expanded my services. I built a portfolio that spoke for itself. And slowly, quietly, my little hobby started making real money. More money than I'd ever made before. More money than Daniel made at his corporate job, if I'm being honest. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. I didn't tell anyone. I kept it to myself, tucked it away like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Because part of me was afraid that if I said it out loud, they'd find a way to take it from me. To diminish it. To make it small again. And then came the call. The one that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was at my desk, working on a campaign for a tech startup, when my phone rang. It was a real estate agent I'd been casually talking to for months. I'd been browsing listings, daydreaming about what it might be like to own something of my own. Something that wasn't tied to Daniel's family, or their opinions, or their constant judgment. The agent's voice was bright, almost giddy. "I have something you need to see. It just hit the market this morning. It's perfect for you." I almost laughed. Perfect for me? I wasn't sure I even knew what that meant anymore. But I went. I drove out to the address she gave me, and the second I pulled up to the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with a wraparound porch, tall windows, and a garden that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a magazine. It was bigger than anything I'd ever imagined owning. And it was for sale. I walked through every room, my heart pounding in my chest. I pictured myself there. I pictured Daniel and me hosting dinners, filling the space with laughter and warmth. I pictured a life that felt like mine. And then I saw the price. My stomach dropped. It was more than I'd saved, more than I could afford on my own. But the agent leaned in, her eyes twinkling, and said, "You know, with your income you could qualify. I've seen your financials. You're doing better than you think." I didn't sleep that night. I ran the numbers over and over again. I looked at my contracts, my projected income, my savings. And I realized she was right. I could do this. I could buy this house. On my own. So I did. I signed the papers 3 weeks later. I didn't tell Daniel until after it was done. I wanted it to be mine first. My choice. My risk. My win. When I finally told him, he was stunned. Shocked even. But he was proud. I could see it in his eyes. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like he saw me the way I wanted to be seen. But his family? They didn't know yet. And I wasn't sure I wanted to tell them. Part of me wanted to keep it to myself, to savor the victory without their opinions tainting it. But Daniel insisted. He said we should host a family gathering at the new house. Show it off. Celebrate. I agreed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be a celebration. Not for them, anyway. If you're still with me, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's listening. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. And check the description box below for more stories like this one. Stories about standing up, speaking out, and taking back what's yours. The day of the gathering, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. I told myself it was just nerves. Excitement, even. After all, this was supposed to be a celebration. A chance to show off the home I'd worked so hard to buy. A chance to finally be seen. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what was coming. I knew Richard would find something to criticize. I knew Diane would make some passive-aggressive comment about the decor or the neighborhood. I knew Scott would smirk and say something that would make everyone laugh at my expense. It's what they always did. Daniel must have sensed my unease because he wrapped his arms around me that morning and whispered, "Today's going to be different. They're going to see what you've accomplished. They're going to be proud." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But hope and reality are two very different things. They arrived around noon. Richard was the first through the door, his eyes scanning the entryway like he was appraising it for auction. Diane followed, her lips pressed into a tight line as she took in the polished hardwood floors and the chandelier hanging in the foyer. Scott came last, hands in his pockets, that familiar smirk already playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, well," Richard said, his voice booming through the hallway. "Looks like someone's moving up in the world." I forced a smile. "Thank you. I'm really proud of it." Diane tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over the living room. "It's quaint. A bit much for just the two of you, don't you think?" Quaint. The word landed like a slap. This house was anything but quaint. It was grand. It was mine. But I swallowed the retort that bubbled up in my throat and simply said, "We wanted space to grow." Scott let out a low whistle as he wandered toward the kitchen. "How much did this place set you back?" "Must have cost a fortune." Daniel jumped in before I could answer. "We got a great deal on it. And it's a solid investment." "We?" Richard raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to me. "Or did you finally start pulling your weight?" The room went quiet. I felt the air shift, the tension thickening like a storm cloud rolling in. I could see Daniel tense beside me, his jaw clenching. But before he could say anything, I smiled. "Calm. Steady. I've always pulled my weight," I said softly. "You just weren't paying attention." Richard chuckled, the sound dismissive and condescending. "Right. With that little hobby of yours." There it was. The jab I'd been waiting for. The one I knew was coming. And this time, I didn't let it slide. I didn't shrink. I didn't look away. "Hobby," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You know, Richard, it's interesting that you keep calling it that." He shrugged, pouring himself a glass of water from the kitchen tap. "Well, what else would you call it? You play around on a computer all day. Design some logos. Make some websites. It's not exactly a career." Scott laughed, and Diane's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. Daniel looked like he wanted to say something, but I held up a hand. I didn't need him to fight this battle for me. Not anymore. You're right, I said, my voice calm but firm. I do design logos. I do make websites. I also build entire brand identities for businesses that go on to make millions. I consult with Fortune 500 companies on their digital strategies. I've been featured in industry publications. And last year alone, I made more than Daniel and I combined have ever made in a single year. The room went silent. Not the polite kind of silence. The stunned kind. The kind that hangs in the air like smoke after a fire. Richard set down his glass, his smirk faltering. What are you talking about? I met his gaze, unflinching. I'm talking about the fact that my little hobby paid for this house. Every single dollar. Daniel didn't contribute a dime. This is mine. Diane's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Scott looked like he'd been slapped. And Richard just stared at me, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something that almost looked like respect. But then the moment passed, and the smirk returned. He let out a short, sharp laugh. You're telling me you bought this house? On your own. That's exactly what I'm telling you. With what? Monopoly money. The table, we'd moved into the dining room by then, erupted in laughter. Not Daniel. He was quiet, his hand resting on my knee under the table. But the others? They laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Like the idea of me being successful was a punchline. And that's when I said it. Funny you mention it, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. That hobby just bought the house you're sitting in. The laughter stopped. Immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint rustle of leaves outside the window, the sound of Richard's breathing, slow and deliberate. He stared at me, his smirk gone, replaced by something harder, something colder. You're serious. Dead serious. Diane looked at Daniel, her eyes wide. Daniel, is this true? Daniel nodded, his voice quiet but steady. Every word. Scott leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. You bought this house. I did. By yourself. By myself. He didn't say anything else. None of them did. They just sat there, staring at me like they were seeing me for the first time. And maybe they were. Maybe, for the first time in the 8 years I'd been part of this family, they were actually seeing me. But the thing about being seen is that it's not always comfortable. Not for them, anyway. If you're feeling this right now, if you know what it's like to finally stand up and speak your truth, drop a comment below. Let me know what you'd say in a moment like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Because the fallout from this moment, it's going to shake everything. Check the description box for more stories like this, where standing your ground changes everything. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. Not because of what was said, there wasn't much said at all, but because of what wasn't. The silence was thick, suffocating, and every clatter of silverware against porcelain felt like a small explosion. Diane picked at her food, her eyes darting between me and Daniel like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces to. Scott stared down at his plate, his jaw tight, his usual cocky demeanor nowhere to be found. And Richard ate slowly, methodically, his gaze fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, refusing to meet my eyes. I'd won. I knew I'd won. But winning didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't feel triumphant or satisfying. It felt hollow, like I'd been holding my breath for so long that when I finally exhaled, there was nothing left inside me. Daniel reached for my hand under the table again, squeezing it gently. It was his way of saying, "You did good. I'm proud of you." And I appreciated it. I really did. But part of me wondered if he understood what I'd just done, what I just risked. Because this wasn't just about proving them wrong. This was about drawing a line in the sand. A line that said, I matter. My work matters. And I won't let you make me feel small anymore. But lines like that come with consequences. After dinner, Diane excused herself to use the restroom, and when she came back, her expression had shifted. The shock was gone, replaced by something sharper. Something more calculated. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "You know, it's wonderful that you've been so successful. Truly. But I can't help but wonder, does Daniel feel comfortable with this arrangement?" I blinked. What arrangement? Well, you know, you being the primary breadwinner. Men have egos, dear. It can be emasculating. I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. Before I could respond, he did. Mom, don't. But Diane pressed on, her tone light and airy, as if she were discussing the weather. I'm just saying, it's important to consider how these things affect a marriage. Balance is key. And when one person is so focused on their career, it can create tension. My career isn't creating tension, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Your lack of respect for it is. Diane's eyes widened, as if I just said something deeply offensive. I'm only trying to help. No, you're not. You're trying to undermine me. You're trying to make me feel guilty for succeeding. And I'm not going to let you. Richard cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. Let's not turn this into a fight. We're all family here. Are we? I asked, turning to face him. Because I don't feel like family. I feel like the outsider you've been tolerating for 8 years. The one you've mocked and dismissed and belittled every chance you got. And now that I've proven you wrong, you can't handle it. Richard's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. Am I? Because I remember every single comment. Every joke. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And you know what? I'm done pretending it didn't hurt. I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. The room went silent again. Scott pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. Nothing. I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You've spent years treating me like I don't matter. And now, when I finally prove that I do, you call it nothing. That's exactly the problem. Scott shook his head, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. You know what your problem is? You're too sensitive. We were just joking around. You can't take a joke. You weren't joking. You were cruel. There's a difference. He didn't respond. He just grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Diane followed, her lips pressed into a thin line, her earlier warmth replaced by cold indifference. Richard lingered for a moment, his gaze finally meeting mine. And in that moment, I saw something I didn't expect. Not respect, not pride, but something close to it. Acknowledgement, maybe. A quiet admission that he'd underestimated me. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and walked out. Daniel closed the door behind them and turned to me, his face a mixture of exhaustion and admiration. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. They're not going to forgive you easily. I don't need their forgiveness. I need their respect. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, and I let myself sink into him. But even as I stood there, wrapped in his warmth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not just between me and his family, but between me and him. Because as much as Daniel supported me, as much as he loved me, I knew a part of him wished I just stayed quiet. That I kept the peace. That I'd let things go the way I always had. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, things got worse before they got better. Richard stopped calling. Diane sent a few passive-aggressive text messages disguised as check-ins, asking how we were doing and if everything was okay. Scott didn't reach out at all. And Daniel tried to mediate, tried to smooth things over, but there was only so much he could do. The damage was done. But here's the thing, I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from their judgment. Free from their expectations. Free from the suffocating need to prove myself to people who were never going to see me the way I wanted to be seen. And my business, it kept growing. I landed 3 major clients in the month following the dinner. I was featured in a design magazine. I was invited to speak at a conference. The success I'd been building quietly in the background suddenly felt loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, you know how heavy that choice feels. And if you're going through something similar right now, just know you're not alone. Drop a comment if this resonates with you. And don't forget to check the description box for more stories about finding your voice and standing your ground. Months passed before I heard from Richard again. And when I did, it wasn't what I expected. It was late October, the kind of crisp autumn day where the air smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves. I was at my desk, working on a pitch for a major retail brand, when my phone buzzed. Richard's name appeared on the screen. My stomach tightened. I almost didn't answer. But something, curiosity, maybe, or a stubborn refusal to let fear dictate my choices, made me pick up. "Hello. It's Richard." I waited. He didn't say anything else for a long moment, and I could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology." I nearly dropped the phone. Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "An apology," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes. I was wrong. About you. About your work. About everything." I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. "What changed your mind?" "I did some digging. After that dinner, I looked up your company, read some of the articles, talked to a few people in the industry." He paused. "You're the real deal. You've built something impressive. And I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." "Why not?" "Because it was easier to dismiss you. Easier to keep you in a box labeled Daniel's wife than to see you as your own person. And that was wrong. I was wrong. I didn't know what to say." Part of me wanted to tell him it was too late, that his words didn't undo years of hurt. But another part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to crave his approval, softened. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means more than you know. I'd like to make it up to you. If you'll let me." And he did. Over the following months, Richard became one of my biggest advocates. He referred clients to me. He introduced me to contacts in his network. He even attended one of my speaking engagements, sitting in the front row, nodding along as I talked about brand strategy and digital transformation. It was surreal, and it was healing in a way I didn't expect. But the real turning point came at Christmas. Daniel and I hosted another family gathering, this time at their insistence. The atmosphere was different, lighter. Diane complimented the house without a hint of passive aggression. Scott asked genuine questions about my work. And Richard raised his glass during dinner and said, "To my daughter-in-law, who proved me wrong in the best possible way." I cried, right there at the table. I couldn't help it, because for so long I'd convinced myself that their approval didn't matter, that I didn't need it. But the truth is it did matter. Not because I needed them to validate me, but because I needed them to see me, to acknowledge the person I'd become. And they finally did. But here's what I learned through all of this. You can't wait for people to see your worth. You can't shrink yourself to make them comfortable. You can't apologize for taking up space or for being good at what you do. Because the truth is, some people will never see you the way you deserve to be seen. And that's okay. Their blindness isn't your burden to carry. I spent years letting Richard and his family make me feel small. Years swallowing my pride, my anger, my hurt. And for what? For the sake of keeping the peace, for the illusion of being accepted. It wasn't worth it. It never was. So I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped dimming my light. I stopped making myself smaller. And the moment I did, everything changed. Not just with them, but with me. I found my voice. I found my power. I found the version of myself I'd been hiding for so long. And you know what? That version of me is pretty incredible. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated, I want you to know something. You are enough. You've always been enough. And the people who can't see that, that's their loss, not yours. Now, before you go, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a comment telling me your story. I read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And check the description box below for more stories like this. Stories about resilience, revenge, and reclaiming your power. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and undeniable. It's proving them wrong without saying a word. It's building a life so full, so successful, so unapologetically yours that their opinions simply don't matter anymore. That's the revenge I chose, and I wouldn't change a thing.